We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome you to the webinar today, High Performance Governance, What You Can Do Differently with Kelly Marsalis, who has her IOM and CCE, and she is President and CEO of the Plano Chamber of Commerce. And just as a reminder for those joining us, whether for the first time or just as a reminder, Institute is a CAE and a CCE approved provider. So that means that if you are on today's live webinar, you are eligible to receive 1 point of CCE credit or 1 hour of CAE credit. And you do have to just email us after the webinar to the IOM inbox, and I will go ahead and drop that here in the chat. It's iom@uschamber.com. And again, you do have to email us. You can't just ask in the chat, and we do ask that you wait until after the webinar. And both a recording of today's webinar and the presentation materials and some resources will be available after the webinar. So I just dropped that here in the chat. So after the webinar, you are welcome to email us for that transcript. And we will go ahead and move on to our main event, Kelly. She has some great content today, so we really want to get to her portion. So Kelly Marsalis is President and CEO of the Plano Chamber of Commerce, where she leads nearly 1,000 member businesses, and advances economic growth in one of Texas's largest cities. She has more than 20 years of experience and has earned both her CCE, her Certified Chamber Executive, and in 2017, she chaired the Board of Trustees for IOM. I'm sorry, in 2023, she chaired the IOM Board of Trustees. And
don't make me any older than I am.
And Kelly has held leadership positions with Dallas Regional Chamber, Rockford, Illinois Chamber, and Stillwater, Oklahoma Chamber, and is a graduate of Oklahoma State University and holds certifications through Loyola Marymount University. So she's got just such a wide spectrum of experience professionally and education. And she's a strong advocate for public education and equally busy at home with her husband and their daughter, Tilly, where leadership takes on a whole new meaning. And if you do have questions throughout the webinar, we invite you to ask those in the chat. And with that said, I will turn it over to our main event. Kelly, it's all you.
Thank you, Cece. I'm so excited to be here. I know I saw a lot of names on the registration that I recognize from my Institute days. I'm a big fan of Institute, and really credit this program with so much that I've gained both personally and professionally. So I'm excited to be here. As Cece said, my name's Kelly. I'm here in Plano, Texas, just about 20 miles north of Dallas, if you're not familiar with the area. I noticed a lot of your things in the chat about summertime or about going to the beach and all these great warm weather things. I like to go to the mountains and get out of the heat of Texas. So I'm excited about that too. I have been working for chambers and associations for over 20 years. And just to kind of level set a little bit for our conversation, it's been, it's been chambers from the small kind of community-based chambers with 4 to 5 staff and a budget of less than $500,000, all the way up to what was my longest tenure to date at a large regional chamber in Dallas with 50 staff and a budget of over 12 million. But I mention that because in all of my roles, I have worked and managed governance at the chambers I've worked for. And that's regardless of the role I had. Sometimes it was my dedicated role, and sometimes it's just been what I have to help with. And that, I think, is one of the things that I want to stress today is whether you are the CEO or in a C level of your organization, or you're a staff member and looking to learn more about governance, we all play a part in that. So today, the chamber that I sit at, again, just so you kind of have a frame of reference, we have about 900 members. Our budget's about 1.7 million. We do have a 501c3 foundation, and our staff is made up of 8 full-time, 2 part-time, and 3 contract employees. We do not take any public money or manage our CVB or economic development, but rather focus on advocacy and workforce development. So that gives you just a little bit of an idea of my experience and what I'm kind of doing right now. And I'm excited to spend this next hour with you guys because, again, governance is one of those topics that we listen to a lot of things, we read a lot of things. It's always something we find that's important. But in my experience, very few organizations really intentionally work on it until something goes wrong. And I actually got my CCE on a project overhauling our governance structure. So it is a little bit of a passion area for me. So when we talk about high performance organizations, I think We often focus on strategic plans, innovative programming, how is the membership growing, what does the revenue look like, but strategy rarely fails because of the strategy itself. It usually fails because of governance and maybe the joint leadership approach. And so some of the highest performing associations and chambers aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest budgets or the most staff. They're often the ones with leadership teams, that being board volunteers and the CEO, that operate with that clarity and trust and accountability and alignment to the strategy. So today we're not really going to go through how to manage governance 101. It's a more practical look at how governance can be approached a little differently, and more importantly, how you can implement some different tactics there. So I want to just go ahead and kind of dive in. You'll see a QR code on your screen, and we're going to take a couple polls during the conversation today. And so the first one, if you want to go ahead and scan that QR code and answer the question, I'd love to kind of just get a sense of how you describe your board right now. And so that would range from highly engaged and strategic, you really think they understand the strategy and what they're there for, what their roles are, all the way down to it's really challenging to manage. And if you're not the one kind of managing them or in the driver's seat or the CEO, you probably still have a pretty good sense of that relationship, but go ahead and I'll give just a minute for you guys to do that. Full disclosure, there is a limit. So if you get to it and it says it's full, I'm sorry. But that'll be a great way for us to just kind of get a sense of where everybody's at today. And I am looking at it right now as well to see, you should be able to see the answers. Go ahead and don't hit the green arrow or the purple arrow to go on to the next question. We'll do that here in just a few minutes. But okay, so far we have about a third, and a third of highly engaged and strategic, supportive, but not very strategic, and kind of inconsistent. So the good news is nobody is saying that they're in that challenging to manage phase. And yeah, I'm sorry if it filled up, my apologies, but you can check it on the next one. So today we really want to talk about the outcome that we're after. So really that high performance governance approach, which really we're going to focus on kind of three areas: clarity, alignment, and accountability. And in those high performing organizations, whether you feel like you have one yourself or you maybe know of one that you've seen or learned from or heard from at a conference, we tend to find that board members don't really ask what happened. It's not a look back. It's not, let's talk about what happened at our most recent event. I mean, unless there's an issue you need to address, but they're really more looking at what's next and how do we help. And I think something that's kind of interesting to think about is that fine line between being in the driver's seat when it comes to what's next and getting their buy-in to the vision that everybody should be agreeing on. So in addition to those three key areas of clarity, alignment, and accountability, focusing on the future and what is coming next is really where you're going to see a differentiator there. So when we talk about clarity, I'm really talking about clarity of roles. Do you, as the staff person, does your board as a board member and the staff really understand what your role is in working together? The board governs, so they're all about guiding the strategy, offering that insight, but the CEO really needs to be the leader. They're the ones driving, and then the staff is who's going to execute. And I know some of you are probably saying, I am the CEO and the staff. I'm a one-person shop, or I'm a smaller team. This still applies, and we'll get into a little bit more about why it's so important, even for small and micro organizations as well. And so when we talk about strategic focus and alignment, we're really talking about making sure that everything that you do, all of your agenda items, and all of the things you bring to the board for discussion focus on future and impact. So are they aligning to where you're trying to go, the outcome you're trying to accomplish? They're going to focus on that future and impact, not reporting. you can read a report. And listen, let me also say, every single one of these things that I am probably gonna that I am gonna say today is something to consider staying away from. I've done or I continue to do in some way. And so we've all been there. But over, really getting into reports and lengthy reports and having something for a board member to report on because you feel like that's engagement can kind of hurt you as well. And then mutual accountability. And accountability is a word that I hear a lot, I use a lot, but we really need to probably think about it from a mutual standpoint. The board does hold the CEO accountable, and the CEO then in turn holds the staff accountable. But there's also a responsibility for you, if you are the CEO or your CEO, to hold the board accountable as well. So there needs to be some mutual accountability there. So I always think it's fun. I have a mug actually that says board member is better known as a board member. And that is a pitfall that we all fall into sometimes. I'm sure we all have those board members that we could think about in our head right now that either always looks like they're completely bored at a meeting, they're playing on their phone, they're checking their email. And so I want to talk a little bit for a few minutes about some common traps that we all fall into, and things that can really stifle your board's impact and their output. So there's 4 traps that I'm going to run through today. Reporting, blurry lines, engagement without that accountability, like we talked about, and then legacy structures. And I will say again, just don't feel bad, because all 4 of these are traps that I have fallen into in the past year, and I'm probably going to fall into again. So we all do it, but these are great reminders of things to work on throughout the year, and really also be thinking about this when you go into recruitment season for your board. Honestly, there's never I'm never out of recruitment season. I've always got my eye open for a great board member. And we'll talk a little bit about making sure you have specific attributes in mind. But these are things that I always kind of think about when I start prepping my nominating committee for that work as well. So let's talk about the reporting trap. So maybe kind of just to yourself, think about some of your most recent board agendas and think about the number of or the amount of time spent talking at your board members, whether it's you or a staff member, or how long during that board meeting, or how many times do you feel like, I'm just tired of talking, I want to hear anybody else talking? And so I think getting into meetings that really are just about staff updates can be very tough for those board members. And they ultimately become passive listeners. So they're not really hearing what you're saying. Like I said, they're checking email, they're on their phone, they're busy people. Their mind is going to naturally wander, even if it's really important information, even if it's information they've asked for. When it's just a staff update, or it's just the staff talking to them, it becomes this very difficult situation. We're all toddlers again at some point, and so we all have a hard time really focusing. And I always like to say, if this meeting could have been an email, we have a problem. And I fall into this all the time, because it's like, I want them to buy in on this, I really need their support, they haven't been at the last couple board meetings when we've talked about this, I've got to talk about it, I have to get the information out there. And maybe we do all have problems getting our board members to read things ahead of time, or to read things outside of a meeting. But if it could have been an email, it's definitely a governance issue. So the second one that we talk about is blurry lines. And I think this is one of the most important ones that I struggle with sometimes. And that's really clarifying those roles and making sure that board members understand what they're there to do and what they're not there to do. And so we're going to talk a little bit about getting in the weeds and discussing operations. But the moment a board spends more time discussing tactics than outcomes, governance really starts shifting into operations. So you'll see that your board will get more into the operational, the daily activities. You're going to see yourself if you are the CEO, and maybe even your staff if you're not the CEO, but you maybe don't have a CEO that kind of keeps the separation there. It's going to become a micromanagement situation. And that is really difficult. And I did see in the chat an example of a board agenda. And yes, I will send you not just mine, but I'll send you a few others that I've come across as well. So you have to really watch for this. Micromanagement can do a lot of damage. It can not only make your board completely ineffective, it can get you fired really quickly. It can distance trust with your board. You can find yourself not being very effective because you're so busy responding. And I think it's really hard, especially, I probably identify as a Gen Xer. And I was raised by working parents that said the customer's always right, your boss is always right, you hop to it, you make sure it gets done. And I've been going through this a little bit with previous board chairs. I've invited some of that micromanagement on myself because I did not really stick to my guns. And there's a few ways that you'll have to, really work on putting that role clarification in there, especially if you're already to the point of micromanagement. But I told this to my staff the other day. I said, the minute the board meeting sounds like the staff group chat, we don't have governance, we have committee creep, or we have mission creep. And so you've got to keep board members out of the daily operations and really focusing on that strategy and what they're there to do. So the third trap is engagement without accountability. I think we often unintentionally confuse engagement, meaning they show up a lot, they're always there, they're always available, with accountability, which to me really means they create value and meet those expectations. And so I think, I'm going to give you an example. So consider this, and I think you can all probably picture this person in your mind from your respective organization, but they're what I would call the super volunteer. We all have them. The board member, they never miss a meeting. They attend every event, every ribbon cutting, every luncheon. They're the first to get there, the last to leave. They always want to help. But it's almost more of a social experience for them. So they're really nice. They're a nice person. You always are gravitated to go talk to them. They'll show up to help you with anything. But they maybe never make a member introduction. Maybe they don't walk over and make new members feel welcome. They don't advocate on behalf of the chamber necessarily. They're not really the one to raise their hand in a meeting and offer a lot of strategic ideas. And maybe they've never brought a strategic or meaningful connection into the organization. So they show up, but are they really moving anything forward? And then you take a moment and you think about the other board member, and they might not be able to make it to very much because they're running a company, or they are able to recruit their vendors and their customers and advocate for policy, but they're not always maybe the first one through the door. And maybe they're making a call and making an introduction. So participation is the activity, but the accountability is really the contribution in the end. And so I think that's really important to distinguish. Attendance does not necessarily move your organization forward. Now, I do think it's important that you have attendance and accountability. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit about some different tricks, or not tricks, sorry, tips to help build that accountability with your board members and make them pay attention to how much they're showing up for you. But if your only qualification is that you have time, you're just filling the chair. You're not necessarily building a strong board. Okay. Trap 4, legacy structures. This is one of my favorite to talk about because I feel this on so many levels in my community. I think it's one of the most relatable governance examples because every chamber every association, all of us, we've inherited the committee that no one can explain, or the event that no one can explain why we do it. So again, I'm going to kind of go down this road of a scenario. And so I call it the committee no one can kill. So you have this committee, let's call it community relations. You don't really know what it means. You don't really know what they do, but they have met every year for 15 years, or every month, excuse me, for 15 years. But not one person on the committee can actually tell you what the purpose of the committee was when it started. They might have a mission statement, they might have some things that they do, but you can't actually tie it back to why it started. The same set of people probably always attend. The agenda, there's not a lot of work on the staff side necessarily to manage it because the agenda never changes. They review things, they discuss things that have already been decided, maybe by staff or by the board. And they even end the meeting saying, "Great meeting, see you guys next week," or "Great discussion." But then one day somebody says, "How does this tie back to our strategy?" Or "What strategic goal does this committee support?" And nobody can answer the question. Or maybe they can answer the question, but it's not a strategic priority anymore, or it's not something that's really moving your organization forward. And then somebody says the most dangerous thing for any organization, which is, "Because we've always had it. We're doing it because we've always had it." Um, it's I've always said to my staff, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me when I say, "Why do we do this event?" or "Why do we do this thing?" And they say, "I don't know, we've just been doing it since I've been here." And so suddenly that structure that was designed to create value years ago, and there was a distinct purpose, has become something we protect just because it exists. And it engages the same 5 people who, if you try to draw a straight line to their investment, probably is not an investment you would miss necessarily, if there even is one. I have seen chambers too that have these legacy committees and these standing programs, and when you actually start picking some holes in it, half the people that engage aren't even members. And that's okay if it's not required, but if you're a membership organization that's relied on dues, that's a question. So I think I want to bring these up on the screen. Yeah. So committees that exist because they always have can be really dangerous, and members who won't embrace that change for one reason or another are also hard. And then I think something that's kind of interesting to think about is, if you always have the same people around the table, you always bring the same folks into the conversation, you're never going to change your outcome. And so I think that's something that's interesting that we don't think about a lot. If you're not bringing diversity of thought into the conversation, if you're not switching up your committees into task forces or sunsetting them at some point, you're kind of always going to come to the same explanation. And so an example of this that really hit home for me in the past couple of years, it's not so much about the board itself, but it had a direct kind of governance impact. And this happened in my own organization. So, and it was a situation where it really didn't have anything to do with the board, but the board did not come to my rescue in this situation. So I knew we had a problem. So we host an annual community and business awards program. I'm sure it's similar to something that a lot of you host in your communities. We recognize leading businesses, but we also recognize individuals of influence, and specifically a citizen of the year. And one of the conversations I got into with my staff is, I said, "Tell me what a citizen of the year is. Describe it for me." And while we have a definition on paper, what we were really finding was that this Citizen of the Year had become a Lifetime Achievement Award, instead of what I felt was more obvious, of this is an individual within the community that has a tie to the business community. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're a chamber. Some of you might be associations, so it kind of depends on your audience. But at the end of the day, we're a business organization. Do we serve the community? Sure, in a lot of ways. But businesses are our constituents and our customers. And so I felt like there needed to be a true business tie. And it was so nepotistic in its selection process because only former winners were choosing the next year's winner. So it was just a big group of friends and folks that had done this work together decades before. And so this lifetime achievement wasn't really recognizing and identifying individuals in our community that were making a really big impact that year, that particular year. Look at the needle that moved. And so we had a situation where we had a 28-year-old manager of a facility who had developed, who was helping facilitate and employ adults with developmental disabilities and special needs and connecting them back to the workforce. And so it was totally reshaping the narrative around this and getting some of these folks back into or into the workforce for the first time. Um, Versus, I think it was maybe a retired principal who had not been involved in the business community in decades. And, you know, it kind of occurred to me, I was like, there's other organizations in our community that can celebrate the profound impact that an individual like this has made. But we really need to focus on advocacy, workforce development, the business community. And so we overhauled our selection process. So we had more diversity of thought. We reformulated the definition of what some of these awards were supposed to be. And I got death threats, literally. Like, these former winners who weren't invited to the table to help make that decision were so upset because this had become such a social opportunity for them, that they were just, I mean, it was chaos. And the board didn't come to my rescue. They actually said, well, let's go back and do it the old way, and let's take a better look at how we do this. And I went back to the board and I said, and my staff too, because my staff was really confused. And I said, what are we doing here? Because we're going to go to sleep tonight having served a group of folks that can be served by another organization that is more in line with that type of honor. And our strategy is really about engaging the business leaders of today and looking at the future and focusing on workforce. And we just completely worked against that. And so the way we manage some of those things, and sometimes the courage we have to stand up and make a hard change, can really impact that governance and how the organization is seen as well. Because I was really afraid. I'm like, we're going to be seen as an outdated organization that really just focuses on kind of the past generation. I want to show that we're innovative, we're relevant, and we're with the business community today. And so I think it's important to kind of take a long look at your organization and say, if we were creating it today, would we still build it with the same structure? And that's a good way to kind of avoid that legacy issue. Okay, so go ahead and grab your phone, and if you want to answer the poll question or just think about it to yourself. Which one of these do you think is your biggest challenge? Do you think it is the meetings going too operational, the board over or understepping their role, that lack of accountability from your board members, or an outdated structure? And so as you answer those and kind of think about maybe what your big issue is. Okay, so as it's coming in, you can see, if you're able to, I'm sorry for those that maybe don't make the cut, since there is a limit. Right now it's exactly even between the top three once again. So the two operational of the meetings, lack of accountability just jumped up ahead, and then the board over and understepping. So I think, while you might suffer a little bit from all of those issues, I think it's important to kind of maybe get an understanding of what is the most maybe holding you back the most, and kind of start thinking about that as we go into what we want to how we want to approach it differently. So now I want to talk through 4 shifts to high performance governance. So we talked about the traps that you can fall into, but we want to talk about because that was what we promised for today, was what can we do differently to have a more impactful, higher performing board or governance structure. And so again, 4 traps, 4 approaches to help you get over some of these humps. So we're going to talk a little bit about moving from information to insight, participation to accountability, advisory to more strategic, and then taking the CEO as an operator to a leader. And that's where we're going to talk a little bit again about a smaller entity and how to approach that as well. So the first shift that I mentioned, information to insight. Instead of hearing those long reports, there's some things that you can do at your board meetings. Hopefully you're all utilizing pre-read materials, sending out reports ahead of time, things that they can review at their leisure. I always make the joke with my board, if you're having trouble sleeping one night, I got pages of stuff for you to read. And so, you know, I always provide a summary at the very top of the report that says, here's the 2 things you need to know, but feel free to dig in if you want to learn more. I promise you, probably less than 2 of those board members are reading the long version, but I do offer it. We also use meeting time for discussion and decisions instead of just presenting. I never want to be the person in the room doing the most talking during a board meeting. It actually, I think, puts us all in a position to that can sometimes be a little worrisome if we're the only ones talking. It puts a lot of pressure on us as staff to deliver things. And it kind of, it's not the best use of their time to hear us talk. We want to hear them talk. And so I think respect your board's time, really move from that informational type sharing mode to getting their insight and making those decisions. So the second shift that you can do now is moving from participation to accountability. And this goes back to what we talked about. Just showing up is not accountability. That's just participation. And so instead of approaching it that way and saying, hey, we're just tracking attendance, here's everybody that showed up. There's some additional things that you could do a little differently. So you want to make sure, and I'm sure you're all doing this already or should be, and I will provide some examples of this as well after the webinar. You want to have clear expectations of what that engagement and accountability looks like. So some organizations might call it a board member job description. We call it, it's titled the document or the online version that we share with our board. And we go through this before they even are finalized. We say, here's the expectations. So we want to be very upfront and clear that if you take a board seat, it is not just you're a member in good standing. I mean, that is part of it. You got to be a member, but there are some clear expectations and measurable points on accountability. And so it's things like helping us recruit, having someone on their staff participate in a program or committee, and clearly having some of those items where they can show that engagement. And then we do go into some of those defined roles, really looking at how do you advocate for the organization? How do you maybe not push your personal agenda in the name of the organization, and kind of train them to understand the difference. Be really upfront with, I'm going to call you. I'm going to need you to make a phone call for me sometimes. And yes, there is some attendance expectation. And we do track it and we do share that tracking. And so it's not in a form to punish anybody. We're not trying to embarrass them or punish them, but it really does clarify what the expectation is, and their behavior, it changes pretty quickly because nobody in that room wants to come in and open up, you know, whether it's virtual through a board portal or a folder or whatever, however you're providing information and tools for them at these board meetings, nobody wants to open it up with an attendance tracker and an investment tracker and a referral tracker on the front page and have nothing next to their name. Institute used to do that to us as volunteers. They would share every meeting a tracker of who we had recruited to attend Institute, and I was like, I'm getting my 2 people in right away because I don't want to be the only board member that doesn't show that I'm doing my job. And so I think that that's a good step there. Um, on the third shift, we want to go from advisory to more of a strategic partnership. And I do see in the chat that some of you are asking for examples of some of this stuff. And yes, I'm happy to show the tracker. I'm happy to show the agendas. And so Cece had let me know that I could share it with them and they would post it with, I think, the recording. But also, you're welcome to email me and I'll share whatever I can. So the shift from advisory to strategic partnership is really powerful because I think all of our boards unintentionally become reactive approval bodies. Um, we we develop ideas as staff. We give the board update on it and say, here's what we think we should do, and the board reacts. But that's not really the best approach to maybe having that high functioning, high performance. We need to bring them in to help them shape that direction earlier before the plans are fully baked. Because that way, then once you know what the strategy is and what kind of the board's feelings are on it, as staff, you can run with it and you're not waiting for on approvals. You're not waiting to jump through some of these hoops. And so instead of having them react, we want them to shape that direction. We want to use structured discussion questions to help get to that information. And so I'm going to walk through a couple of examples here. And so what I would call a reactive board model is this example. So as the CEO, you walk into a meeting and you say, our membership renewals are down. Our staff is recommending a 7% dues increase, and we want to do a new retention campaign. What are your thoughts? We've probably all been to a meeting like that this year alone. And then what happens is they respond from their personal experience. And somebody in the room is going to say, well, I wouldn't pay more. There's no way. You're dipping into a budget I don't have. Somebody's going to say, well, where's your data? What are your neighboring chambers doing? What are your peer chambers doing? What is the cost of doing business in this region? You know, whatever data that you've already looked at and examined, but you're asking them to react to it after the fact. And then it becomes much more opinion based and tactical. It's about the tactics of carrying something like this out. And you leave with very scattered feedback. And I'm sure you could all raise your hands and say, yes, I've been in a meeting where there's been a discussion and I left there not really knowing what to do next or having to go back a month later. And that's really when they become more of a focus group. It becomes a little bit of, I don't know, I'd almost say like an argument, or you feel defensive, your staff feels let down because they've put a bunch of work into something. And so on the other hand, you want to kind of shift from that reactive board evaluating the idea to helping shape them. And so boards tend to support more what they help create. We know that. And so the strategic model really looks at the same example, the same scenario to say 3 months earlier than that meeting, before a recommendation existed, the CEO went in and said, we're seeing changing expectations from our members. There's a bunch of early signals that value perception is shifting. Companies are looking for different things. They're investing their money a little differently. So before we spend time on building a solution, I want to get your perspective. What are you seeing? And so then you got to ask some structured questions. And these are going to change depending on what you're really looking for. But you know, what are you saying? What are you seeing in your industry around how your customers are defining value? Because every business has customers, right? So how are they approaching their own value proposition? If your chamber disappeared tomorrow, what would local business miss most? And sometimes you might need to go out and ask some of these questions of your general membership. The board might not be your only sounding board, but I think getting them involved early in that discussion helps them buy in more. So now, and you can kind of see those structured questions for this specific example, but any topic you bring to them, I'm sure you could come up with a handful of questions to get some more information from them. So now you have board members that contribute perspective instead of their opinions. They're not thinking with their own wallet. I think that's another downfall we sometimes see with boards is they're thinking of it as a personal expense instead of a business expense. And so that's, you have to really help board members through that. They're willing to share their own market intelligence around the topic. They're building that consensus before decisions are needing to be made. And I think you and your staff leads with more guidance. And so later, when the recommendation comes forward, you can easily say, this isn't new. We've been working on this together since the beginning. There's no surprises here and we're ready to move forward. And so I think that naturally leads into that consensus building, and the discussion that follows will be a lot easier. Okay, the final, I know I'm kind of winding down on my time here, so we might have questions, but I have a few more things to get through. So the next one, again, is shifting that CEO as operator to leader. And so I think this is another really important one. I'm going to talk pretty specifically about chamber CEOs and those with a smaller staff, but I know it's the same for associations. And we hear a lot from smaller teams, or maybe you're a solo employee, say when they hear that and they say work on strategy, and you might think, well, that sounds good, but I'm printing name tags for events, I'm fixing registration links, I'm sending emails. And so you're trying to kind of validate that reality while having that challenge to lead a little differently. And so I think where we see that really need to shift is the CEO still needs to be allowed to function as a leader, not just a really highly compensated events coordinator or a firefighter or a problem solver, or whatever the job description is. And I think it's important to understand we've all done operational work. We're all going to do it today. We've moved tables, we've stuffed packets, we've stuffed envelopes, we update PowerPoints and solve these last minute issues, but that's not the issue. We always have to jump in and do those things. It's just when you become permanently trapped there that it becomes a governance issue as well. Because if the CEO is spending all their time managing daily tasks, or who's ready to lead tomorrow, who is out there in the community building the relationships, who is taking the time to research and attend things like this and identify those emerging trends, who is shaping community influence and building a stable of influential folks to surround themselves with when a decision is important. And who's really thinking about the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years in your community if you don't have the bandwidth to do that. And so those high performing boards understand that they're not there to create more operational work for the CEO. They need to create the conditions for that leadership. They need to allow the leadership, and I guess some people might not say, it might not be the right thing to say, but give them enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak. Give me the runway to do my job or fail at it. Yes, we've all heard from the beginning of our careers, you want to put a volunteer between you and a problem, but you also have to step up and take on the problem and have the ability to navigate that too. And so the board can be working with you to remove barriers, open doors, make introductions and connections, helping carry those priorities, not pulling you deeper into the tactics. So instead of the CEO managing everything, you need to make sure the CEO is leading strategy, board alignment, and those external influences. And so if you have a CEO or you're the CEO and you're stuck in operations, your organization just can't grow. It's going to stay small. Even if you have a lot of members, the impact is going to stay small. And so again, for all of you and my friends that are leading these one person shops or these really small teams, I think it's more important for you to hear this than anybody. you don't get a pass on the leadership thing because your team is small. You don't. I mean, yes, you have to jump in maybe in ways that leaders of larger organizations have more support around, but small organizations need this mindset probably even more. So you might not have the staff of 10 or 20, but you have volunteers, you have board members, you have committee leaders, you have people with expertise and influence, and you need to, and I will say it's harder to manage them than your own staff. But you have to rely on some of those people with the experience and influence, and you can't build capacity by doing it all yourself. You just can't. And so at some point, leadership becomes less about doing more and more about helping others move those things forward. So I think that's just a really important thing to keep in mind, even for smaller shops. So I want to jump into just a couple of things that you guys can take away. You can do it today, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it whenever you are able to get out of the weeds and think about that growth mindset. But I've got 4 tools to implement and take away. So the first is really around that strategic agenda format. The percentages might look a little different. This is just what I kind of use as a general rule of thumb, but really look at your agenda structure. 10%. 10 is what I try to make of time spent during meetings on administrative. Approving financials. I mean, unless you got a budget to approve or something that's a really big thing, maybe it's your annual audit report, you're going to have some stuff that's a little bit longer, but 10% of your regular agenda should be on approving minutes, consent agenda, financials, that administrative side. You've got a finance committee to dig deep into the financials. If your board is wanting to go through every line of your financials, you don't need a finance committee. So you're just duplicating efforts. 30% should really be in insight and education, setting the stage, providing those benchmarks, whatever other, trendy thing we can say, but giving them the tools to help you, posing those strategic questions. And then 60% is what I strive for to have be discussion, decisions, and moving the needle on something. And so some examples of those topics can be trends that you're seeing in workforce development, membership value gaps. Where are you missing the mark? What is coming? And then maybe it's around policy positions. So are there things in your community that you want your chamber to take a position on? Maybe your state, your federal level. Get your board talking about it. You don't have to be in the middle of a session to start making those decisions. The second tool I would recommend is that expectation framework. You need to make sure you have a set of published, written, documented in their hands expectations for attendance, participation, being an advocate, and financial support. There is nothing wrong with saying, if you want to be a board member of my organization, you got to step up and do more than just pay dues. You might make an exception for somebody, but I think it's really better to state it and get it out there and have that expectation, because what gets stated gets followed. And if you have a high performing, impactful board, you're going to have people lining up to get on it. And so they will come with the financial support. This one I think is so important. The stop doing list. I just talked about it with my board earlier today. I think it should be a regular activity, whether it's at every board meeting or something you do through email or one-on-one conversations. Have your board identify every year or every 6 months or whatever works for you, 1 to 2 programs you should stop doing, and 1 committee that maybe needs to be rethought. And maybe at the end of the day, you'll come to the decision that you want it just need tweaked. But I think if you find that you eliminate something and nobody notices or nobody says anything, you made the right decision. If somebody throws up their hands and says, I can't believe you do this, and you're able to point to it, you can bring it back, or you can have that conversation, but get them in the habit of reevaluating things that don't need to be there and that take up a lot of time and energy and resources for your members. And then the 4th tool that's really important, I hope you're all doing it, but have some CEO chair alignment rhythm. Have a regular cadence of check-ins or meetings. My board chair and I, we check in with each other every other week. We talk, and the opposite weeks, I send her a quick update. It's not a here's all the things I did this week, look at how busy I am email, but it's, hey, did you see this? Did you know this company's doing this? This event's coming up that some other organization is putting on. Do you want, if I get offered tickets, do you want to go? It creates less surprises. It helps you guys really lean on each other with priorities, and you present that united leadership front. If you ever get the feeling that your board chair is fighting you for leadership, that's a governance problem. And so you guys are not in a rhythm. And while you shouldn't do each other's job, I think it's always important to keep in mind that maybe you could. If you needed, you know, if you have the tools to help the next person in line step in as board chair if something happens. Same as, especially if you don't have staff to lean on, if something happens and you need to take a breather, or you need to step away from your job, or you have an emergency, do you have board members that can step in and kind of keep things in line for the brief time that you might need to step away? So again, not telling you to go in and blur those lines, but do you have that backup and that rhythm in place if you need it? Okay, the final poll of those four recommendations, those four tools that you could start using right away. Which one do you think you could would be most impactful right now for your organization? So far, everybody has said an agenda redesign. I'm not surprised by that at all. I think um, I, you know, I would almost rather not have an agenda for a meeting than have to look at another agenda with all the items on it. Of course, we're never going to get away from agendas, but it can be very daunting, and it can turn a lot of people off if it's super long and super report heavy. So I think really spending some time thinking about what you're doing in your board meetings with your agendas and with the discussion is really helpful. So that's the clear winner. Board expectations was the only other one that was highlighted. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's some resources to share. I do have a high performance governance scorecard. So it's a little self quiz that you can take. You can rate, it's about 10 to 15 items that you can kind of rate yourself from 1 to 5 on, and then you get a score, and it kind of shows you some tools and some things that you can do. You can do that with your board. You could actually ask them to fill it out and see what their feedback is. I like to do that. I've seen a few different ones shared by different folks that work in the governance space. And so every year I try to have kind of a little self-assessment for our board at the beginning of the year. And then we take it again at the end and see what has changed. It also helps me identify gaps with maybe some of the skills that are needed for our board. And so I will share that with you guys. There's also sample board agendas, consent agendas, the expectations and job descriptions, and also sample board update emails. So something else that I do once a month is I send my board an update on just things that are in the news, things that I'm working on, information that could bog down a meeting and make me talk a lot to them. But instead they can read that when they have time, if they have time, and maybe they don't, and that's okay. It's not going to impact the organization if they don't find out about one of those few things, but it's often a great way to streamline communications. Okay, I think that is everything. I'm happy to take any additional questions. I just did what I said I shouldn't, and I talked at you for an hour, but that was the request. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. And there was one question that I want to make sure got brought up that about weight on meeting attendance. What percentage of absences are acceptable? I don't know if that was brought up. I don't recall that, but that was a question from the chat.
Yeah, I think the percentage of attendance is a good way to look at it, because we all have a different cadence. When I came into my role, our board met every month. It was once a month, and that was just way too much for me. So I recommended quarterly and we met in the middle. So now I have about 6 or 7 board meetings a month. So for us, it's about 33%. It's a third, basically. You can't miss more than a third of the meetings. And I think that, and then we actually add in there a distinction of you can't miss more than 2 in a row. And so because that would really kind of put you at a disadvantage. There are, we do make some exceptions. I think one thing I didn't really get into is the scenario of thinking about, you have a board member that's a top investor, they're a decision maker, maybe they're a CEO, they have a lot of influence, they can write a big check, but they never come to a meeting. And I think that can be dangerous too. We found ourselves in that situation because we were trying to shift to a more CEO level board, C-suite board. But we were recruiting folks that then didn't show up. And it kind of taught our other members that that was okay. And so then we really started seeing a drop in attendance. And so for me, it's about 33%, 30 to 33% that I would say is kind of my general rule of thumb.
Excellent. Thank you. And there was a question, would you be willing to share your bylaws or perhaps other samples of bylaws?
Sure. Yeah, my email is listed there on the screen. It's on our website as well. I'm not too hard to track down. Cece can share my email with you. Just let me know what you're looking for. I'm happy to share.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I know we are coming up on time, so I do want to invite, if anyone has any final questions, please ask those here in the chat. And just wanted to thank you again, Kelly. This was so helpful. I know I was taking notes and very useful information. And if it's something that maybe you knew, it's a great reminder and brings it back top of mind to make sure we're accountable to building the best boards in our communities. So I will give it a minute. And just as a reminder for those that weren't here at the top of the call, if you were on today's webinar, so this does not, unfortunately not count if you're watching the recording, but if you were present today, please email us at the IOM inbox and you are able to receive a certificate of attendance that is good for 1 credit of CAE or 1 point of CCE credit. And again, Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us today. We are lucky to hear from you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.